Welcome back. All right, so one of the more popular videos in this channel's history is one where I was looking at relocation. That was back in 2017. That was 2 moves ago. Yeah, that video was in our bedroom in the old townhouse we lived in. But I wanted to talk about this today because it feels like with this offseason, we're seeing the Arizona Coyotes move to Utah, of course. And there's still, Arizona has the right to come back into the league over the next 5 years under Alex Morello. My guess is if it's outside the 5 years, they're still going to go back to Arizona. It'll just be with a different owner. That'd be my guess, just personally. But we'll see what happens with the land bid, which is next month. That being said, the way I've organized these today is by the oldest arena in the National Hockey League to the youngest, because arenas are often talked about. This team needs a new arena. They need a new building. It'd be a shame if they had to move because they need a new building. And it was the talking point behind Arizona for the last however many years. It feels like the entire time they've been there, and now they're in Utah, so I use the Utah Jazz magnet for them. They're going to play out of the Delta Center. The money's already been approved for a new arena in Salt Lake City. They're going to revamp the Delta Center so that you can get more hockey fans there and less obstructed views. They're going to be there for the next few seasons. Keep in mind the mullet was full last year and the year before, but 4,600 fans just doesn't cut it for a National Hockey League arena. Now, the Coyotes were valued at $500 million. My guess is that the Utah team will double that valuation when Forbes brings out their valuations in November. And I'll come back to Utah. But I want to go up to the top here with the New York Rangers. They play out of the oldest building, which is Madison Square Garden. It's refurbished often. So, because of the fact it's refurbished, it's redone often, I don't think there's anything, anybody, anywhere that's ever going to be said about, maybe they shouldn't play out of Madison Square Garden. I think rightfully people would think that's a terrible opinion. Where do I find the dislike button? $2.65 billion is the franchise value for the Rangers. They are as solid as a franchise can be in the National Hockey League. And yeah, they play out of the oldest building. There's so much history there. It's great. Then there's Calgary, Scotiabank Saddledome. 17,501 fans in attendance per game. Attendance has never been the issue in Calgary, but the Saddledome is. The franchise has a valuation of $1.1 billion. The new arena is in the process of being built. I believe they broke ground a couple months ago in terms of getting the area cleared up and getting it ready for the new building. But the new building ensures that the Calgary Flames aren't leaving town anytime soon. Without a replacement for the Saddledome, there was a chance that the Calgary Flames could get moved. I've mentioned Utah. We're going to mention Utah again because the Arizona move, and it's going to increase franchise values. I've seen people say, I don't think it's going to last in Salt Lake City. I don't think it's going to work. The reality is, there's a lot of money in Salt Lake City, and there is definitely the kind of money that the NHL is looking for, and I think it can and I think it will work. Whether the attendance this upcoming season's 13, 14,000, however many fans they can get into the arena for a hockey game this year, it's still going to be way more than they had at the Mullet in Arizona. And I feel like Salt Lake City is ready for a team. And so we'll see how things go. Then you get to Anaheim and San Jose are the next ones. And again, this is by the oldest buildings, Honda Center and SAP Center. The Ducks are worth a value of $925 million. San Jose $900 million. They're at the lower end. Honda Center an average of 15,687 fans per game. San Jose 13,559 fans per game. San Jose, the attendance really low. Completely understandable. They're in a rebuild. Anaheim's attendance isn't great either. Understandable. They've been in a rebuild for a while. And again, people with less disposable income than they might have had some years back, it's tougher to justify going out to hockey games. That being said, I like Honda Center. If Anaheim ever came out and said, we think we need a new state of the art arena, I might agree on some level, but I think Honda Center is still a building that works. SAP Center, I know the one thing that always threw me off, dating back to 2018, the first time I went to Vegas, and there was a San Jose Sharks fan that explained to me, there's no teal at SAP Center. You wouldn't know that it's the Sharks Arena. And I'm like, how do you not have teal? And it's San Jose. But yeah, it's one of those things that I've looked for ever since then. And I'm like, man, that's totally changed my experience watching these games. But I don't think there's any chance that we see a team leave California. I'll even come over and talk about LA too. Crypto.com Arena. It's a really bad name. 17,945 fans per game. A valuation for the LA Kings at $2 billion. Team's pretty well grounded in LA. St. Louis, we know St. Louis is a very valuable franchise. 990 million is their valuation via Forbes. They play out of Enterprise Center, and their average attendance this year 18,084 fans. St. Louis is a hockey city. The NHL is going to be in St. Louis for the rest of my lifetime, and probably the rest of the lifetime of whoever's watching this. Chicago United Center, $1.88 billion valuation from Forbes last year, 18,836 fans per game. The attendance went through the roof with the drafting of Bedard, as was the expectation. As much as people may not like the Chicago organization for various reasons, the Chicago organization isn't going anywhere, and the Chicago Blackhawks are going to be a very strong financial team forever. Speaking of which, you got Montreal. Montreal, $2.3 billion valuation. Bell Center gets 21,099 fans per game. I mean, it's Montreal, right? I cannot stand here and make any argument for Montreal at all in terms of, how stable's the franchise. It's Montreal. Ottawa, there was some concern in Ottawa that there might be a move taking place. And then Eugene Melnyk passed, the Melnyk family selling off the franchise. And it feels like Ottawa's on pretty solid ground right now, although the determination of where they're going to build a new arena is still up in the air. They play at a Canadian Tire Center. $950 million is the valuation for the franchise. And they pulled 17,580 fans per game. So Ottawa did a good job of seeing their attendance go up this year, even though the team on the ice did not reach the playoffs. This is a very encouraging number. All they need is that new building, whether it's in LeBreton Flats or downtown, wherever they put it. The reality is that should solidify the Ottawa Senators for a very long time to come. Rogers Arena in Vancouver. I've been there many, many, many times. The valuation for the Canucks, $1.32 billion, 18,826 fans per game. The building was absolutely packed. It was rocking, especially towards the end of the year when I saw a couple games there. And it's great to see. So Vancouver really, really rock solid. So is Boston. They have a $1.9 billion valuation, playing out at TD Garden. Would love to go. Haven't been. 17,850 fans per game in TD Garden. It's almost a guaranteed sellout in Boston and should stay that way. Tampa Bay, Amalie Arena, an average of 19,092 fans per game. $1.25 billion valuation for the franchise. There are those who think that Tampa Bay, they aren't real fans. Tampa Bay, the attendance will drop. The attendance has been really high for a long time. I think that narrative has been disproven. And so, Tampa Bay as solid as they get. Buffalo. Buffalo's an interesting one. They play at a KeyBank Center. Their attendance this year, 15,981. Surprised it's that high. $750 million valuation for the franchise. The attendance has been lower, and so with them not drawing at a rate that I think they'd like to, the reality is this is a team that's been going through a rebuild for so very long. I don't think there's any danger of the Buffalo Sabres going anywhere. Sadly, I don't know if there's any chance of them going anywhere on the ice either. I don't know if they ever make the playoffs, but we'll see. But Buffalo not going anywhere. Philadelphia, Wells Fargo Center, 18,438 fans per game, $1.65 billion valuation for the franchise. Philadelphia is pretty solid. This is definitely a well-grounded franchise. Same with the Capitals. Now, of course, they were going to move, but they were just going to move down the street. It wasn't that big of a move. That move has now been nixed, and now they're going to stay at Capital One Arena, where they drew 17,841 fans per game this past season. $1.6 billion franchise valuation. The Washington Capitals, another team, very solid. No chance of them going anywhere. Florida. Now, it's not that long ago that while everybody's been talking about Arizona the last few years, it's not that long ago it was Florida that were getting all the conversations. That Quebec Nordiques fans would go down there and move this team to Florida. Move this team out of Florida. There were so many empty seats. But this year, 18,632 fans per game. The valuation, again, these are 2023 valuations from November of that year. The $775 million valuation for Florida, that has to go up this year. And I think it's going to go up a lot. The attendance is really high. This franchise looks very, very stable at this point. Any and all discussions I've seen of whether or not it can work in Florida have basically all fallen by the wayside. It's working in Florida. It turns out all they needed was competent management and a good on-ice product. Who knew? Nashville, Bridgestone Arena, $975 million valuation for this team. 17,306 fans per game in the arena. Many years back, there was some discussion about whether or not the owner of BlackBerry was going to buy Nashville and move them. The BlackBerry show / movie, very good. Whether you've seen the miniseries or the movie, very entertaining. But yeah, the Nashville Predators have become a very grounded franchise in terms of, I can't imagine the NHL ever coming out and going, well, we don't know if this is going to work. And again, 20 years ago, if they'd said that, we might have nodded and said, yeah, I don't know if it's going to work in Nashville. The fans rallied, and since then, it's been great in Nashville. Toronto, oh, they're going to move. No. Scotiabank Arena, 18,789 fans per game this past season, and a valuation of $2.8 billion. Toronto is basically an excuse to, basically you can just print money with the Toronto Maple Leafs franchise. If you did not have a salary cap, Toronto would eclipse, I would say $150 million would be feasible. If you look back at what the salaries were at back in 2004 before salary cap, and if you project that out over 20 years, I think that Toronto could be in the $150 million range right now. Basically, every free agent we'd be asking, okay, so these teams have money. Which of these teams that have money will the free agent go to? Which, again, is how things were before the salary cap. And then you've got Colorado playing out of Ball Arena, 18,103 fans per game, $1.15 billion valuation for the franchise. I think it's remarkable. The Colorado Rockies lasted, 4 years? And now the Colorado Avalanche have lasted over 25. And there's never been any discussion of whether or not Denver's a hockey market this time around. Whereas, again, with the Rockies, a team that was run really badly, there's definitely a correlation between teams moving and being run badly at the same time. The on-ice product can very often drive whether or not a team makes money and what the attendance looks like. So Colorado, the Avalanche have done quite well off the ice and on. PNC Arena is the home for the Carolina Hurricanes, 18,798 fans per game. They have signed a long-term extension for the lease in that building. They've got an owner who has deep pockets, $825 million valuation for the franchise, which I think will go up. I think most of the valuations are going to go up this year because that sale of the $500 million worth Coyotes now going to the $1 billion that was paid by Utah means that franchise will probably be worth about $1 billion when Forbes gets around to it, and it's going to drive up all the other valuations. So owners are going to be pretty happy, although the only time you can cash in on that is really if you sell. But yeah, PNC Arena, good building, loud building, and Carolina, another team that at one point people were like, you got to get them out of there. You don't really hear that now. I've talked about LA, so we'll move on to Columbus. Nationwide Arena has pulled 17,016 fans per game this year. The valuation for the franchise, $765 million. There are occasions where also people saying, Columbus should be moved. And I don't understand why. I don't think Columbus has ever lost money in their time in the National Hockey League. B, they still pull decent crowds considering this team has never had home ice in a playoff series. They've never got out of the second round of the playoffs. They've struggled to even make the playoffs through most of their existence. It is remarkable how well Columbus draws, considering it would be understandable if the market had kind of tuned out the Blue Jackets and moved on. XL Energy Center for the Minnesota Wild. Here's where it gets interesting. So 18,526 fans per game at XL Energy Center in Minnesota. At American Airlines Center in Dallas this year, 18,532 fans. Almost exactly the same. The franchise valuation for Minnesota, $1.05 billion. The franchise valuation for the Dallas Stars, $1.08 billion. So the Dallas Stars, who of course moved from Minnesota, were the Minnesota North Stars, almost the exact same valuation as the Minnesota Wild, the team that exists because the Minnesota North Stars moved. And you can still see the North Star being used as the eye in the logo for the Minnesota Wild. So it's interesting to look at that and see, hey, these teams are kind of tied to one another. The difference really being the on-ice success. Dallas got to a Stanley Cup final in 2020. They're in the conference final right now. They've been in the conference final before. Minnesota was in the conference final in 2003 and haven't been back since. But in terms of valuation, they're both in good shape. Both of them very stable franchises. New Jersey. There have been times where New Jersey was seen as a team that might move again. I remember when they moved there from from Denver. They went from being the Rockies to being the Devils. There were conversations within a few years of them moving to New Jersey about, is this going to work? Is this building going to work? Are the fans going to show up? This franchise is still badly run. Well, they're still there. Prudential Center pulling 17,598 fans per game. The valuation for the franchise at $1.45 billion. So it's a very valuable franchise. Their attendance is very good. It's a very stable franchise overall. PPG Paints Arena in Pittsburgh. And how many years did we see Pittsburgh fighting for a new arena and rumors that they might move? Mario Lemieux saved this franchise twice from moving. First, when he was drafted and the attendance went through the roof in the 80s, and then as an owner, he helped to save this team in Pittsburgh. 17,909 fans per game at PPG Paints Arena, $1.18 billion valuation from Forbes. Pittsburgh is much like St. Louis, and St. Louis at one time was going to go to Saskatoon. Bonkers, right? But definitely teams that have had their struggles in the past when it comes to stability. They don't have those struggles now. Winnipeg, lots of talk about Winnipeg this year, wasn't there? Canada Life Center, an average of 13,490 fans per game, which is up from where it was to start the season. The franchise valuation at $780 million. The reality is Winnipeg is a smaller market. They're never going to generate the big money like Toronto, the Rangers, Chicago, and Montreal do. They are always going to be working on a budget that's a little different from other teams, but they've shown an ability and a willingness to spend to the cap and to spend the amount of money you need to bring guys back, like with Scheifele and Hellebuck on the deals they got last year, right? And by last year, I mean, it was this season, but it was technically in 2023. And so for the Winnipeg Jets, the concern is that if your franchise is making money, but not a ton of money like the other ones, your attendance is all that much more important. I don't know that the media deals that Winnipeg has are in the same realm as, say, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal either. And so for Winnipeg, there's always going to be that razor thin difference. And I would love to stand here and say, well, a team would never leave Winnipeg again, but it can happen. It absolutely can. When you've got a small market, you've got a low Canadian dollar, all these fun things, it can happen. I hope it doesn't. I don't think it will anytime soon. But when you've got ownership coming out, Mark Chipman earlier this season, raising a little bit of concern and saying long term, this doesn't work. For right now, okay, but if the attendance doesn't get better, long term, this doesn't work. They might be the only team on this board right now that I would say keep an eye on Winnipeg. But even then, Gary Bettman said Winnipeg's a hockey city, and I think that the black eye would give the NHL if it left Winnipeg again. I think they're going to do everything they can to keep the team there. Edmonton playing out of Rogers Place. How do you get Rogers Place? By talk of whether or not the previous arena at Rexall was good enough and whether or not the team might have to move. $1.85 billion valuation for the Oilers. That's fantastic for Edmonton, of course. 19,173 fans per game. And again, there have been various rumors for decades about the Oilers and their viability and a brand new arena and really having the right direction and some good draft picks too. That McDavid kid turned out to be pretty good. Have really stabilized Edmonton, and those rumors are gone at this point in time. Detroit playing at a Little Caesars Arena, 18,980 fans per game, $1.2 billion valuation for that franchise. Yeah, Detroit's a pretty solid franchise overall. No danger of the Red Wings going anywhere. T-Mobile Arena in Vegas is full every single night. 18,139 fans per game and a valuation of $1.13 billion. I'm actually kind of surprised it's not a higher valuation for Vegas. And they're stable. And I know people will say, well, we'll see when the team isn't any good, whether or not fans stay there. But with the moves that management's making, I don't think they plan on being mediocre, period. I think the plan is to keep bringing guys in and moving other big names out. And if you got to sell guys off for way less than what they're worth because you need cap space, then that's what you do. And you keep bringing in the big names. And if it keeps working for Vegas, maybe they won't be mediocre anytime soon. Seattle playing at a Climate Pledge Arena, 17,887 fans per game in attendance. Their valuation a little bit higher than Vegas's too at $1.23 billion. Seattle's a hockey city. I have no doubt in my mind Seattle's going to be able to support that team for the long haul. They're a hockey city. They're going to be an NBA city at some point again as well. And then UBS Arena is the newest of the facilities. The New York Islanders playing out of there, an average of 18,099 fans per game. That building is rocking. $1.55 billion valuation. This is a very rich organization. And again, there was a time for the New York Islanders where there was some concern. Ownership. Maybe somebody who didn't have any money owned the team. And that happened. It's baffling, but it did. And this was a team that went through the Fisherman era, which was only a year, but we remember the Fisherman because, my God, what a year that was. And just that team in general was a complete disaster. Still here, now they're solid, and there's no chance of them moving. So, unlike when I did this back in 2017, we don't really have a team that you can look at right now and say, they are definitely moving, or they should be moved. And back in 2017, we could point at Arizona. We could point back in 2017, I would say, at Florida as well, as teams that were, a concern in terms of attendance, future ability to fill an arena. There was an out on the lease for the Florida Panthers, which is now come and gone. They did not exercise that out, but there was some thought that maybe they could. They were losing a lot of money. That's kind of gone by the wayside now. So the NHL set records this season for revenue and for attendance. Those are tied to one another. Attendance has usually been a little over 50% of overall revenues in the NHL. Now that's changed. I know that it's not as high as it used to be after 2020 and finding out, hey, we're going to have other revenue sources. They've definitely found other revenue sources, and rumor has it that their money this year was $6.2 billion in revenue. We're going to see the salaries for NHL players go up a lot over the next couple of years. Salary cap going up too. Of course, that's how the salaries go up for the individual players. I think we're looking at a time right now where the league has 32 pretty solid franchises. It is hard to find a franchise right now and say you can't expand because, and the only one that was holding it back, and I've been saying this for months, was Arizona. Once that Arizona move happens, I think we're going to see expansion talk pick up, in part because you have so many teams right now that are on solid footing. You have a few that need new buildings, but in every case where a team needs a new building, it's either already been announced, the funding is there, or the funding's going to be there, and the announcement should be coming within the next. I would say with the Senators, it'll come this summer. I'd be very surprised if it's not during the summer, or at the very least early in next season. But either way, they're drawing right now at Canadian Tire Center. They're not losing money that I've heard, and so, yeah, things are pretty solid all around. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. If you had to hedge and say, you know what, I think over the next 10 years, this team might be in danger, let me know your thoughts. But again, I think everything's pretty solid around the National Hockey League, from the New York Rangers to the New York Islanders. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.